day, everyone.
It's Thursday, November 3rd. The House Speaker has cameras at home, but no one was watching them. We start here. Amid escalating threats, members of Congress are asking for heightened security measures.
DePape also had goals of attacking other lawmakers and their family members.
Why federal officials say this type of violence could affect every American. Election deniers are running for office, but what would actually change if they won?
I don't care for mail-in voting. That's why I go to the poll.
We'll break down how a crop of names on your ballot could affect all the ballots to come. And the student who lived next door wasn't a student at all.
He was at times swiping in with other people's key card, or if not, he was getting let in by people who thought that he lived there.
How did a stranger sneak into dorms for a year at one of the top universities in the world? From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Last night, President Biden made this big speech ahead of the midterm elections, and he said November 8th is not just about economics or crime or abortion, it's about what kind of future we're all hurtling toward.
My fellow Americans, we're facing a defining moment, an inflection point.
Of course, this week, while we're talking about political rage, Exhibit 1 is the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband at that family's home in San Francisco. It wasn't that long ago that an attack like this, allegedly targeted at a leader from either party, would spark bipartisan sorrow. And to be fair, at the Capitol, leaders from both sides of the aisle have expressed outrage. But in the far-right media ecosystem, conservative stars immediately began downplaying the attack.
Nancy Pelosi, well, she's got protection when she's in D.C. Apparently her house doesn't have a lot of protection.
Then rejecting the idea that rhetoric can fuel anything like this.
You can't say people saying, let's fire Pelosi or let's take back the House is saying go do violence. It's just unfair.
Then engaging with unfounded conspiracy theories, treating the man suspected of attempted murder as a patsy or even a hero.
If some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out.
But what's extra troublesome here is violent threats to lawmakers are up across the board. And yesterday, some of those lawmakers put in a public request for more security, particularly for those in the presidential line of succession. Let's go to ABC's Mola Lenghi, who's been in San Francisco since this news broke. That's where we find him again this morning. Mola, this guy, David DePape, has now pleaded not guilty, right? What else is he saying?
That's right. He has pleaded not guilty. He's currently being held without bail.
The charges that we are filing today include attempted murder, residential burglary, assault with a deadly weapon.
Based on what investigators say DePape told them and what he allegedly said the night of the break-in and the subsequent attack at the Pelosi's, saying some pretty disturbing stuff. DePape allegedly describing the speaker as the, quote, leader of the pack of what he said were lies told by the Democratic Party. He told investigators that he was going to hold Nancy hostage and talk to her. If she lied, he was going to break her kneecaps. DePape also later explained that by breaking her kneecaps, that she would then have to be wheelchaired into Congress, which would show other members of Congress and the country that there were consequences to actions. DePape saying that he was targeting Speaker Pelosi because she's number 2 in line for the presidency. Also allegedly telling Paul Pelosi the night of the attack that they're all corrupt, talking about lawmakers and folks in Washington, and that we have got to take them all out, referring to members of Congress. DePape now facing federal charges, and it was believed that DePape also had goals of attacking other lawmakers and their family members, lawmakers in California, as well as federal officials. Wow. Now, interestingly, DePape's attorney this week saying that his client may have been susceptible to misinformation.
We're going to be doing a comprehensive investigation of what happened. We're going to be looking into Mr. DePape, his mental state.
Authorities are now combing through his online social media footprint. There are conspiracy theories about COVID-19, conspiracy theories about election denial, about the 2020 election, whether President Biden is in fact a legitimate president. Those sort of conspiracy theories seem to have sort of infiltrated David DePape's world.
Hey, and Mola, like you said, Pelosi second in line after the vice president to the presidency, hugely important figure. But doesn't that raise the question about security? Like, what is security like at the Speaker of the House's house?
Well, if she is present, if she is home at the time, then she has a large security footprint here. Capitol Police are here. Sometimes local police are here, a sort of combination of the two. The question is, when she's not home, as she was not home the night of the attack, what are the security measures in place? Nancy Pelosi's home is equipped with surveillance video that Capitol Police have access to. They can view it remotely. The issue is that apparently they were not viewing it at the time of the break-in. It wasn't until they were monitoring it and saw local police on scene, they saw the lights of the San Francisco Police Department, that they realized there was an issue at the property, and they rewound the video and then saw the break-in. That was a little too late. Should Capitol Police have been able to prevent this somehow? Could they have prevented this somehow? That's the question, because we know that the current political climate requires beefed up protection. That's just the reality of the times. The Capitol Police Chief himself has said that they don't have enough resources. They need more resources in order to better do their job.
Yeah, and this kind of illustrating a much bigger issue than even any one election or any one office. Mola Lenghi reporting this all out of San Francisco all week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
The midterm elections are, of course, on Tuesday. And according to our partners at 538, 60% of Americans will have an election denier on their ballot, someone who claims the results of the 2020 election weren't on the level.
When I'm governor, we're going to take a sledgehammer to these damn electronic voting machines.
Some have been ambiguous about this, but some have been adamant, saying the election system needs to be overhauled in state after state.
And when my coalition of Secretary of State candidates around the country get elected, we're going to fix the whole country. And President Trump is going to be president again in 2024.
Which is why, for months, experts have been saying the most important race on your ballot might not be that seat for Congress. It could be your state or local officials in charge of elections.
Hey, good morning, Commissioner. Can you hear me okay?
I can. How are you?
So what I've been wondering for months, what I finally just started calling people about out of sheer confusion was, so what if someone's an election denier? What would actually happen if they won? So let's do this. First of all, can I get your name and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Bob Lucy. I am a Washoe County Commissioner for Commission in District 2 here in Northern Nevada. I've been serving for 8 years, 2 terms, and I am out of my term in January.
Bob Lucy is speaking to me from his home office in Reno, Nevada. There are some filing boxes around him, some books, and this guy is dressed head to toe in stuff that's repping Washoe County. He's got the county seal on his hat, his fleece vest. When you ask him about being a county commissioner, he geeks out.
That's right. They're the operations of government, what I would say at a local level.
Do you like it?
Love it. I actually really enjoy the strategic planning and the budgetary and everything that goes into being a county commissioner. It's phenomenal.
He's a proud Republican. He voted to re-elect Donald Trump in 2020. But when Trump lost Nevada, everything around Lucy started to change.
All right. Final public comment. Mr. Manager.
If you're a county commissioner in Nevada, one of the things you do is oversee elections. A lot of these concerns fell to Lucy. And so in late 2020, early 2021, voters began piling into his chambers.
Commissioner Hill, Commissioner Lucy, we're not going to be quiet.
Repeating this claim that had already been debunked over and over, that Joe Biden's victory simply wasn't legitimate.
We had this new kind of uprisal of these election individuals said, wait, this can't be true. This was all programmed.
Many of us feel that the election was invalid, that the elections were stolen for various reasons.
This is a nasty trick by the Democrats.
I could have been voting in Washoe County illegally for 14 years.
And it's a shame that we have been overtaken by lies and deceit.
Like many public officials, Bob Lucy began to realize that by simply saying the election had not been stolen, that his side had lost, he was becoming a political target. That's when he started hearing about a guy named Robert Beadles.
My name is Robert Beatles, Reno, Nevada. Now, let's talk about treason.
Robert Beatles is a very wealthy individual who transplanted from California in 2010 to northern Nevada.
Beatles had made millions in cryptocurrency, but now he was becoming a prominent election denier. Unlike some voters who were just expressing frustration about the elections or suspicions, Beatles wanted to upend the system. Here he is on Steve Bannon's podcast.
If you take back your backyard, you take back your city, you take back your county, you take back your state. So no matter what they throw at us, we're going to be able to, overcome.
Beatles himself showed up to one of Lucy's public meetings and asked this commission to take up a 95-point list of so-called election reforms.
Here in Washington, we cannot be there when you tally the votes. Here in Washington, you can't be there when you see the thumb drives plugged into the machines. Here in Washington, you can't be there for an audit. We have Venezuela on steroids here. Address it.
Thank you.
He wanted hand counts of ballots. He wanted to do away with a commonly used voting software. And he wanted armed law enforcement manning every single polling place.
I mean, ridiculous things that would have cost extreme amounts of money, time, energy, things that we don't have budgetarily to do. We can advocate at the state legislature. We can do a number of different things. However, we cannot make those changes from this dais.
Lucy and another Republican joined the Democrats on the committee in voting no.
Motion carries 4-1. Okay?
A couple weeks later, my re-election campaign starts, and now myself and Commissioner Hartung become the target.
Beatles began bankrolling campaigns to replace Republicans who believed the election was fair, including Lucy. Beatles' Political Action Committee spent tens of thousands of dollars advertising in races that usually don't see that much spending.
What was election night like, or primary night like?
Primary night was tough.
And it worked.
I bled more than I have ever gained from this county. And this guy beats me by 1,000 votes. Beats me in my own district.
We reached out to Robert Beatles for comment. He declined an interview and an offer to answer written questions, but he did say, quote, "It's truly sad that you and the media try to paint people as crazy or worse for taking a few $1,000s of support from me." Bob Lucy's story is not unique. Across the country, lots of Republicans who worked to make the 2020 election run smoothly have now been driven out of office. The question now is, what will their replacements do?
We have candidates who are running on a election denialist platform, and that is really unprecedented in American history.
I called up Nate Pursley. He's a law professor at Stanford University who runs the Stanford Policy Center. He's an expert on election security.
I think a presidential election always has higher stakes, but the situation has changed in the wake of the January 6th insurrection. And so questions of the integrity of the electoral system are front and center.
He's actually done work in other countries, studying elections in fledgling democracies, what works, what doesn't. And he says we're not as far from those countries right now as you might think.
When people lose confidence in the formal election infrastructure, they're willing to abandon all democratic norms in order to retain power. And I think that we are lurching toward that kind of situation that we see in the developing world in strained democracies.
There are three different ways in which elections stop mattering, he says. One is voter suppression. The second is voter confusion. And that's directly related to number three, election denialism, when officials have actual levers they can pull to wipe out the vote.
Oh, I am the wonkiest of wonks.
This is Tammy Patrick. She used to help oversee elections in Arizona.
So I was the federal compliance officer in Maricopa County, Arizona for about 11 years.
Nowadays, she's a senior advisor at this nonprofit called the Democracy Fund, which donates money to groups it thinks will make elections run better. She says in most places, you might have one election denier running, maybe one board seat out of 5. That's not the case in Arizona, though.
Arizona is different. Arizona has a slate of candidates that have a role in the elections process. So you have a governor, a secretary of state, and an AG, all running on this kind of election denial platform.
This, she says, is a key point. By yourself, you can't really do that much to change election rules in this country. She actually gets kind of annoyed when people use hyperbolic terms to hype up individual races. But when officials work in tandem, she says, especially with other officials whose job it is to enforce the rule of law, that's when you can start changing which rules are on the books. In Arizona, the Secretary of State is in charge of writing the procedures manual for best practices at polling places.
So if you had a rogue Secretary of State that decided they were going to change the procedures manual and make it more cumbersome, more burdensome, more time-consuming, more problematic for both election administrators as well as for voters. They could do that, particularly if they have an attorney general and a governor who are willing to allow that sort of activity to occur.
For example, Mark Fincham is running for Secretary of State in Arizona.
I'm running for Secretary of State to restore honor, to restore integrity, to restore security to the Secretary of State's office.
He's emphatically called the results of the 2020 election a sham with no evidence to back it up. In fact, he attended that rally outside the White House on January 6th.
The whole point of this exercise is the fraud that was committed.
He remained outside the Capitol that day, later said he didn't even know about violence until later in the day.
The last time I checked, to be at a place when something's happening is not illegal. I've been treated as a witness, not as a suspect.
But in the past, he's proudly identified as a member of the far-right militia group, the Oath Keepers, who were actively involved in the invasion. Mark Fincham did not respond to requests for comment. He rarely does interviews, but he is neck and neck in the race to become the top election official in Arizona. And in a state that has grown fond of no-excuse absentee voting, Fincham has suggested banning the practice entirely.
So you're not going to
That is
answer the
up to the
question of whether or
legislature.
not you approve of mail-in voting?
I don't care for mail-in voting. That's
Okay.
why I go to the polls.
By the way, what he said there isn't true. State records actually show that Fincham himself has voted by mail a lot in his life, presumably because he thought it was reliable and accurate. If he becomes Secretary of State and tries to get rid of that option, the governor could stand in his way, but the Republican nominee, Carrie Lake, has also expressed doubts in the merits of mail-in voting.
I think,
There's a lot of it in this
going
state.
back to when I first started voting back in the 80s, we had Election Day. Our Constitution says Election Day. It doesn't say election season, election month. And we've watched as our election day has turned into election week and election weeks and now election month. And the longer you drag that out, the more fraught with problems there are.
Say you didn't completely get rid of mail-in voting, and instead, you just want to change when those mail votes get counted.
So if they were to decide, you know what, you can't start pre-processing the millions of vote-by-mail ballots before Election Day.
If that happens, Tammy Patrick says, that is a recipe for chaos. When things are chaotic, ballots are more easily disputable, which she says might be the whole point.
We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
So we're envisioning this sprint to count votes on election night. Now take it a step further. Imagine your state is not just rushing to count the mail ballots, but every ballot, where no votes have been cast on machines. It's just thousands of volunteers examining squiggles in pen while people right outside are getting louder and louder, demanding results. In Arizona, that scenario is an actual possibility. In a state that cast nearly 3.5 million votes in 2020, Mark Fincham has suggested solely using paper ballots, every one of them counted by hand. The Arizona Secretary of State appoints the people who approve voting equipment and has broad powers to discontinue the use of that equipment if he so chooses. Up in Nevada, Bob Lucy says local leaders can upend the system too.
From a county commission standpoint, my opponent, if he gets into office and his election denial kind of process gets in there, you can cut budgets, they can change contracts with Dominion, you can delete staff, you can change software contracts, you can approve more, the sky's the limit.
Trump critics like Liz Cheney have contended the whole premise of the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th was uncertainty.
In the days before January 6th, President Trump told his top Justice Department officials, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman."
The goal wasn't to prove Trump won, it was to get elected officials to say, who can really trust these results anyway? And then they could certify whoever they felt was the winner. That did not happen last year, but this year, in states like Arizona, there are bills circulating that would allow the state legislature to overturn election results they don't see as legitimate. Just toss out the votes, leave it up to the state house. All this to say, the more doubt there is about elections, the more leverage you give to politicians to take it out of voters' hands. So, that's the wonky stuff. That's a sampling of the individual rules you could change, but there's also something else happening.
Reports of voter intimidation around ballot drop boxes in Arizona.
I'm just here.
You're just
taking in the vitamin D.
and you're recording, it looks like.
The vitamin D flying into my body.
In recent days, there have been more reports of people taking it upon themselves to show up to polling places with guns, ostensibly to protect ballot drop boxes.
A deputy says that there were called to a report of 2 armed people in ski masks outside this ballot drop-off location in Mesa.
This just isn't, your neighbor down the street decides they're going to take their hunting rifle and go sit in front of a drop box. These are staged campaigns with a concerted effort to make a concerted impact on how Americans vote in this election.
After all, Tammy Patrick says, election deniers are not just running for political office, they can also be found within sheriff's departments.
There are definitely efforts from within law enforcement. We know about the constitutional sheriff's effort and others that some of these individuals are not rogue actors acting alone. Some of them, in fact, have the support of at least some members of their local law enforcement agencies.
This year, the Brennan Center at NYU Law felt the need to put out a voter intimidation resource guide outlining a range of emerging concerns, from armed vigilantes intimidating voters at drop boxes to aggressive poll watchers who are allowed to witness elections but aren't allowed to harass voters, to poll workers themselves taking it upon themselves to stop people from voting. Just this week, a federal judge had to issue an order banning Arizona ballot watchers from photographing people as they dropped off their ballots after a local judge declined to keep these groups of people from standing near drop boxes. That case is being appealed at the federal level. And that's what this guide reminds voters, that there are federal laws backing up all these state laws prohibiting voter intimidation. But if local officials give the impression that they're cool with breaking the rules, will cooler heads actually prevail on Election Day?
I am worried that with these new laws, with the new sort of extra legal practices that some groups are going to be engaging in, that there could be a lot of confusion in the polling place. And that really is, I think, a dangerous mix given how fragile our political system is right now.
Nate Pursley and Tammy Patrick are both adamant about one thing. We are not at a place where votes can't be trusted. Not right now. Where a state officer might try to change a rule, there's usually some committee to oversee it or a law that they might get in trouble for breaking. Decisions will be appealed up through the legal system. For now, the law will prevail as long as enough people in power care about getting the vote right.
I think now more than ever, that we're moving to a direction of being orchestrated by outside people, and through a collection of laws that we've put in place that hopefully protected individuals, people are using now to they're weaponizing these laws.
What are you going to do next, by the way?
You know what? I don't know. I'm going to get back to my family.
Bob Lucy did not make a big deal out of this to me when we chatted, but I looked it up afterwards. On primary night, Lucy saw the writing on the wall. He had lost, he conceded his race. His challenger will face a Democrat on Tuesday. But that challenger is still convinced there was rampant fraud in the primary. He actually tried to delay the certification of his own race. And so for months, Bob Lucy has had to plead with election deniers, trying to convince his fellow Nevadans that he lost fair and square. And one last thing. In any office building or apartment building or school, any place where people are going in and out all the time, there does seem to be that person that's always there. You see them, you give them a wave, but what do you really know about them? Well, recently, students at Stanford University had a moment straight out of Mean Girls.
She doesn't even go here!
When they realized a student who had been living among them on campus for months wasn't a student at all.
The sense that I got as a reporter from the people that I interviewed is that most of the time they saw him, he was just hanging out in the lounge or sitting alone in the dining hall or in the computer room.
That's Theo Baker, the freshman who broke this story at the student paper, the Stanford Daily. He says this young man, William Curry, was known around a dorm as a transfer student who ran track, who was studying to be pre-med.
He was always carrying around a Stanford track and field backpack, according to people who lived with him, where he kept his stuff.
And he was popular, friends with guys on the football team, had a girlfriend on campus. When RAs organized a dorm-wide game of Assassin, William's name was on that list. Just like any other student, he left campus last spring and came back in the fall.
At this point, William Curry has spent significantly more time on campus than I have.
But every month or two, he seemed to be at a different dorm. Students who lived at that dorm would report a TV had gone missing or a window had been broken into. One female student said she came back to school after a long weekend and found this guy sleeping in her bed. So he'd get kicked out of the dorm only to pop up at another residence hall with a different backstory.
He kept moving to dorms that were right next to each other.
Stanford has now confirmed that Curry was never a student there. He was never enrolled in classes. It's not even clear whether he was trying to study there or just needed a place to stay. The big concern on campus is how this happened over and over again at different dorms for a full year.
Dorms at Stanford require keycard access, and he did not have a keycard because he was not a Stanford student. However, some students told us that he was at times swiping in with other people's keycard, or if not, he was getting let in by people who thought that he lived there.
It also illustrated a problem faced by law enforcement agencies across the country. If leaders in different locations don't talk to each other, the same person can keep trying the same scheme again and again. Stanford dorms apparently weren't comparing notes.
So the university has taken some accountability. After 5 days of radio silence, they responded to the Daily's multiple requests for comment with a statement saying that some of their policies had gaps, and that because they were not communicating fully with the different residential staff in different dorms, he was able to keep doing this again and again.
Students say this was not a victimless crime either. A young woman on campus says when she stopped dating him, he started harassing her to the point where she called police every time she saw him on campus. That did not stop him from checking into his next stay. In a phone interview with the Stanford Daily, Curry denied harassing anyone, but confirmed he had never enrolled at the school. It's now been a week since he was caught, and students who once played assassin with him are now wondering who else among them is hiding something. This makes me remember when I went to college, there was a student who lived in the library for a year, just told the school, I've paid you enough money. This place is 24 hours. I'm going to be sleeping here. Thank you very much. He was definitely a student, though, at least, and library staff all said he was very nice. Hey, if you enjoyed some of our in-depth reporting on the midterm election, let us know. Hit us up with a rating and review wherever you listen. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
The hottest views in daytime are happening right here.
We talk about things on this show that people don't talk about.
That I can't wait to see. Honest takes from strong women.
We need all hands on deck, and we need it right now. This is the time to speak out.
Unafraid to get real.
We stick by our points of view.
We're all seeing it differently, and that's the beauty of The View.
And that's why the most watched #1 daytime talk show is The View. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Zoo! 200!
Oh, 200.
200 episodes of Dr. Pol. Music to my ears.
It's been 10 years, and I'm still having fun.
That rocks.